Greetings and welcome to Legal Phrases in Plain English. Let's get started onto this. What we're going to be looking at today is a guide to speaking legal terminology, but giving it to you explained with the ideas and concepts behind it, not strict legal definitions. Because, as you all know, this is strictly for the entertainment, educational purposes of this YouTube broadcast. Nothing in this is to be used, misconstrued, or misused for anything legal, lawful, professional, personal, financial, tax, or otherwise. So don't do this at home. All right. From that being said, considering that a lot of people out there really don't know what some of these words and terminologies actually mean in plain English, that's the purpose and the intention of going over this guide tonight. Now, before we go forward, just want to remind everyone this is actually from England. So there's some references to some English laws and such, so just ignore those. But the explanations, they ring true regardless of which country you're on. So let's start. Abandonment, giving up a legal right. Abatement is canceling a writ or action. Abatement can also be stopping a nuisance. Abatement is reducing the payments to creditors in proportion if there is not enough money to pay them in full, or requiring the bequests a will in proportion when there is not enough money to pay them in full. So that would be an abatement. Proportion to creditors, payments in proportion. Abduction, taking someone away by force. Ab initio, from the start of something. This phrase is Latin. Above mentioned, describing something which has been referred to before in the document. Abscond, when a person fails to present themselves before the court when required, such as when they have been released on bail and not returned to court. That's abscond. Absolute, complete, and unconditional. Absolute discharge, someone who has been convicted of an offense being released without any penalty. They may still have to pay compensation, though. Ooh, that's an absolute discharge. Absolute owner, the only owner of a property, such as equipment, buildings, land, or vehicles. Absolute privilege, a defense which can be used in a case of defamation if the statement from which the defamation arose was made in Parliament, in fair and accurate news reporting of court proceedings, or made during court proceedings. So the absolute privilege is a defense. This is in England. Abstract of title, a document drawn up by the seller summarizing the title deeds to a property, such as a house. So the abstract of a title means it's not the entire title, it's just a document summarizing the title deeds. Abuse of process, when criminal proceedings are brought against a person without there being any good reason, and with malice. So there's an and for abuse of process. There's no good reason, and it's done with malice, the intent. Abuttals, the parts of the boundaries of a piece of land, which touch pieces of land alongside. So I've heard of meets and bounds and abuttals. Acceptance, when an offer is accepted unconditionally and a legally binding agreement is created. That is the acceptance, creates the legally binding agreement. Acceptance of service, when a solicitor accepts a writ on behalf of a client. Solicitor is their word for an esquire. Acceptor, the organization, such as a bank, which will pay the check or bill of exchange it has accepted. Accessory, someone who encourages or helps another person to commit a crime. Accomplice, someone who helps another person to commit a crime. So we have accessory, someone who encourages or helps another person to commit a crime, and accomplice is someone who helps. So accessory could also be an accomplice, but accomplice isn't necessarily an accessory because they may not be encouraging, they might just be helping out. They might be taking orders, being encouraged by another criminal. Accordingly, a word used in legal documents which means therefore or so. Accounts, the record of an organization's income, spending, and financial situation. That's their accounts. We're on to accumulation, reinvesting income generated by a fund back into the fund. Accused, the person charged with a criminal offense. Acknowledgement, admitting that someone has a claim or admitting that a debt exists. Acknowledgement. So key terms here to be aware of. And anyone has arrived that hasn't been here already, please hit the like and make sure we're getting the notification out there. I think the notifications were kind of thin tonight again. So appreciate anything we can do to get the word out and have more people join us here. And of course, any input, go ahead and pipe up in the chat and we'll address it here. Acknowledgement of service. When a defendant agrees that a writ or originating summons, a claim form since April 1999, of course this is England, has been received, the defendant fills in, signs, and sends back the acknowledgement of service to confirm in writing that the documents were received. Acquit. When a court lets a person go without any penalty. If a court decides that a person is not guilty of a crime or the case has not been proved, it will acquit the person. Acquittal. The court's decision that a person is innocent of the crime they were charged with. To acquit and an acquittal. So a verb and a noun, but this is when a court lets a person go without any penalty. This is that a person is innocent of the crime they're charged with. Action, using the law to make a claim. So we say action, we're talking about a lawsuit. Active trust, a trust where the trustees have other responsibilities rather than to just let the beneficiaries have the trust assets when they ask for them. Interesting, active trust. Act of bankruptcy, an act which, if carried out by a person with debts, could have led to bankruptcy proceedings against that person. Act of bankruptcy could have led to bankruptcy proceedings. Interesting. Act of God. An extreme naturally occurring event, such as an earthquake, avalanche, or flood, that could not have been anticipated. Actual bodily harm. We're into actual damages here. Actual bodily harm. Hurting another person, but less severely than would amount to grievous bodily harm. Wow. So there's actual bodily harm and grievous bodily harm. I think that comes down to intent. Actual loss, an insurance term, which means that the insured item no longer exists. So an actual loss is that item is gone, no longer exists. Actuary, an expert on pension scheme assets and liabilities, life expectancy and probabilities, the likelihood of things happening, for insurance purposes. An actuary works out whether enough money is being paid into a pension scheme to pay the pensions when they are due. Actus reus, an act which is illegal, such as theft. This term is Latin. So actus reus, an act which is illegal. Additional voluntary contribution, extra money people in occupational pension schemes can pay to increase their pension benefits. Ademption, when a gift and a will cannot be made because the item no longer exists. That's an ademption. Wow. Ad hoc, for a particular purpose. For example, a committee set up to deal with a particular situation is an ad hoc committee. This term is Latin. Ad idem, in agreement. This term is Latin. Ad infinitum, adjourned, sine die. Endlessly or forever. This term is Latin. When a court case has no date fixed for it to continue. Endlessly or forever. Wow. Ad infinitum, adjourned, sine die. Adjournment, postponing a court hearing. Adjudge, or adjudicate, to give official judgment about something. For example, if someone cannot pay their debts, a court may adjudge them bankrupt. Adjudication order, the former name for a court order which made someone bankrupt. It has now been replaced with the term bankruptcy order. Now, this is in England, so I'm not sure this applies here in the United States of America. Administration order, an order made by a county court when a person or company cannot pay their debts. Normally, the court orders that the debts are repaid by installments and as long as the debtor keeps okay. So this is not American there. Administrator, someone who has been appointed to manage the affairs of a bankrupt business, or to manage the estate of someone who had died without leaving a will. That would be the administrator. Admissibility of evidence. Which evidence can be presented in court? Evidence must be relevant to the case, but even some relevant evidence cannot be presented, such as hearsay or evidence of little value. The judge decides whether or not evidence can be used in the case. Well, maybe in England. Admission. One side in a case agreeing that something the other side has alleged is true. So when both sides are in agreement, that's an admission by the other side. Admonition. Reprimanding of a defendant by a judge, even though the case against the defendant has been discharged, dropped. So an admonishment. Adoption, the system which people use to become parents, even though they are not the child's natural parents. Adoptive child, a child who has been legally adopted. Adoptive parent, a person who has legally adopted a child. Ad valorem, in proportion to the value. An ad valorem duty goes up as the value of the goods, shares, and so on that it charged on rises. The term is Latin. Adverse possession, intentionally occupying land to prevent the rightful owner or tenant using it. Adverse witness, a witness who gives evidence which damages the case of the side which asked the witness to testify for them. Oh boy, that's a small favor there. An advocate is a lawyer who speaks in court for a client, or a Scottish lawyer who is the equivalent of a barrister in England and Wales. Affidavit, a written statement which is sworn to be true by the person signing it. It is sworn before someone authorized by the court, which in the United States of America would be a notary public. Affirm, 2. Solemnly promise to tell the truth in court. Solemnly promise to tell the truth in an affidavit. Confirm a decision made by a lower court, or allow a contract to continue even though it could have been canceled because it was fundamentally breached. So you can still affirm. Affirmation. Solemnly promising to tell the truth when giving evidence. It is an alternative to swearing an oath when the person giving evidence does not wish to. Affray. Fighting unlawfully. It is a criminal offense. Aforementioned. Describing something referred to previously in the document. And we had another similar word like that, didn't we? It was way up here. Above mentioned. Describing something which has been referred to before in the document. So we have above mentioned. And we have aforementioned. Describing something referred to previously in the document. So it looks like we get a synonym here. Aforesaid, describing something which had been said or related to before in the document. Agency, the relationship between a principal and an agent. An agent is someone appointed to act for a principal. Age of consent, the age when someone can consent to have sexual intercourse. Geez. In the UK, that's 16. All right. Remember, this is for the entertainment educational broadcast here only. Aggravated assault, a more serious type of assault, such as one leading to actual bodily harm. We still haven't got to grievous bodily harm. Aggravated burglary, entering premises armed with a weapon, intending to steal goods. Aggravated damages, extra damages awarded because the defendant has caused the victim anguish, loss of self-respect, or shame. This is a good term here, guys. Aggravated damages. Aggravated damages. Aggravated vehicle taking, stealing a vehicle, driving it dangerously, and as a result, injuring someone or damaging property. Jeez. Agricultural holding, a type of tenancy agreement for someone doing agricultural work. The tenant has special rights, including, when the tenancy finishes, the right to compensation for improvements to the land. If the land has deteriorated, the tenant must compensate the landlord. Interesting there. Of course, this is in England. Aiding and abetting, helping someone to commit a crime. Airspace, the space in the atmosphere directly above a piece of land. If you own a piece of land, you also own the airspace above the land. Alias, a false name. Alibi, the claim that a person was elsewhere when a crime was committed. If someone is accused of a crime, their alibi is evidence that the person was somewhere else when the crime was committed, or an attempt to prove that the person was somewhere else when the crime was committed. Okay, so even an attempt could be to prove it, could be the alibi. Alibi doesn't necessarily need to be proven, it seems. Alien, someone from a foreign country. Alienation, transferring the ownership of property from one person to another. That's alienation. Interesting. All and sundry, everybody. Allegation, an unproved statement declaring that something has happened. Alleviate, to lessen or reduce. Allocation rate, the portion of money left to be invested after charges have been taken off when the money is paid into a fund, such as a pension fund. For example, if the charges were 2%, the allocation rate would be 98%, so it's the difference. Allotment. Shares are allocated to a buyer. An allotment of shares in a company gives the owner of the allotment an unconditional right to buy the shares at a fixed price. All that. Words used to convey words used in a conveyance to introduce the description of the property which is being conveyed. All that. Alternate director, a person appointed by a director to take the director's place. Alternative verdict, a person being found guilty of a less serious crime than the one they were charged with. If a more serious charge had not been proved and the defendant had been found not guilty, the defendant may be found guilty of a less serious crime instead. For example, there may not be enough evidence to convict someone of murder, but there may still be enough for a manslaughter conviction. This is known as an alternative verdict. Amalgamation. Two or more companies combining. Ambiguity. Capability of more than one meaning. When a statement's meaning is not clear because it is capable of more than one meaning, it contains an ambiguity. Ambulatory will, a will which can be revoked or changed while the person who made it is still living. Amnesty, not punishing a person for an offense they have committed and removing details of the offense from the court's records, is giving the person an amnesty. Ancient lights. The right to not have the light you receive from a neighbor's land blocked. Wow. Annual accounts. The summary of an organization's financial transactions during the year covered by the accounts and a snapshot of the assets and liabilities at the end of the year. Annual general meeting. The yearly meeting of members of an organization which must be held to meet the legal conditions. Annual return. Again, this is England. Annuitant, the person who gets paid an annuity. And an annuity is an amount paid out every year to someone. Money usually comes from an insurance policy. It can be split up into smaller amounts and be paid out more frequently, such as monthly. It is usually paid for the rest of the beneficiary's life. Annul, to cancel an invalid marriage or a bankruptcy order. Ante, before. This is a Latin word. Antecedents, details about the past of a defendant or person found guilty of a crime. The information about previous crimes, background, and bad behavior is given to the court before the sentence is given. And tenuptial agreement. Antenuptial agreement. A legal agreement between two people who are about to get married. The agreement sets out how the couple's assets will be divided between them if they later divorce. So they call it the antenuptial agreement. Anton Pillar order. Search order. Appeal, asking a court to overturn a lower court's decision. If the decision of a court is disputed, it may be possible to ask a higher court to consider the case again by lodging an appeal. Appellant, the person who is appealing to a court against a decision of a lower court. Appellate jurisdiction, the authority of a court to hear an appeal against a decision made by a lower court. Appertaining to applicant, the person asking a court to do something. Appointee, the person who gets the benefit of the use of a power of appointment. Appointor, the person who uses a power of appointment. So here we have the appointee, the person who gets the benefit of the use of the power of appointment. Then there's the appointor, the person who uses that power. This person gets the benefit of the use of the power. but this is the person who actually uses it. This appointee is getting the benefit. The appointor is the one that uses it. Appurtenances. Appurtenances. Minor rights in land, such as a right to do something on the land. Well, appurtenances, I think, are also attachments, aren't they? Appurtenances. Okay. Minor rights in land, such as a right to do something on the land. This is a little something we need to take a digression to Black's Law for this. Again, the British are the British, but we need to know in American common law and jurisdiction far there. We'll be there in a second here. Appurtenances, come on, get up there. On bonds there. There you go. It takes a while because this is a scanned document. It doesn't like to scroll very fast. And I take large leaps. It really doesn't like it, but we need to get to the A's. There we go. Attorneys. Almost there. Come on. All right. Getting real close on the R's. All right. Two P's, of course. And man, there we go. Appurtenance. Something that belongs or is attached to something else. Yeah, that's what I thought it meant. And that's from the 14th century. The word appurtenances, which in former times at least was generally employed in deeds and leases, derived from the word apparentier, which is Norman French and means to belong to. Speaking broadly, the word means anything corporeal or incorporeal, which is an incident of and belongs to some other thing as a principle. At a time when construction of conveyances was of a more technical character than it is at the present, word was more considered of much greater importance than it is now, and it was considered that in its absence from a lease or other conveyance, a very restricted meaning should attach to the words of the description of the premises conveyed. Let's see. Appurtenant, annexed, pertinent easement. All right. Well, again, we leave no word behind. They say minor rights to land, such as right to do something on the land. I don't know if that's a good enough explanation of the idea or concept behind appurtenances, but I'll leave that up to you guys. Again, this is just a review. Arbitrage is borrowing money at a lower rate of interest to lend out again at a higher rate, or buying and selling in different markets to make profits out of the price differences. So that's arbitrage. Buy low, sell high. Arbitration, settling a dispute by using a referee. If a dispute goes to arbitration, it is settled by an independent referee. It avoids having to use the courts to settle the dispute. And the arbitrator is the independent referee who settles a dispute without the need to use the courts. All right. Let's hop over here to the chat. And Gary says, I came in late, but what fathers really want to know is the meaning of dependent and needy child. Well, you had to qualify that meaning of needy child, but dependent, we may or may not get to in that context. Remember, this is just legal phrases in plain English in a more general sense. And as you can see, some of these things apply in, I guess, a very broad context here, like appurtenances, which I thought meant something slightly different than this. And as we saw in Black's Law Dictionary, it does mean something a bit different. Anyhow, let's continue down the list here. Arraignment, a procedure at the start of a trial when details of the offenses are read out and the defendants are asked whether they will plead guilty or not guilty. Arrest, to seize someone, usually because they are suspected of committing a crime, and take them into custody. Arrestable offense, a crime for which a person may be arrested without a warrant being needed. Arson, setting fire to something to cause damage to it. Articles, clauses in a document. A company's articles set out its rules, so the clauses in a document. The articles form part of the memorandum and articles of association. What are the articles of association? The documents which set out a company's rules. Assault, when someone threatens another person with physical harm. Words on their own do not amount to assault, but threatening gestures do, even if the person threatened is not touched. Assent, a document used by personal representatives to transfer property to a beneficiary. Asset, something owned, such as a building, a vehicle, or money in the bank. Assign. Here's another little problem here. Assign, to formally transfer something, such as when ownership property is transferred from one person to another. But assignment and transfer are two different words. Once again, we're going to have to consult Black's, because we have assign and transfer. Let's look at the difference here. We're close enough to assign to find it. Because I have a feeling that some of these British definitions aren't applicable in American law. Let's look here. We see assault here too, threat to use force. Ordinary usage creates a difficulty in pinning down the meaning. Etymology, the word is compound of Latin ad and saltere, to jump at. In popular language, it is always connoted a physical attack. When we say that D assaults V, we have a mental picture of D attacking V by striking or pushing or stabbing him. In the Middle Ages, however, the terms assault and battery were given technical meanings, which they have retained ever since. It became settled that, though an assault could be committed by physical contact, it did not require this, since a showing of force, raising an apprehension in the mind of the victim, was sufficient. Also, a battery did not require an actual beating. The use of any degree of force against the body would suffice. The acts of spitting on a person and kissing without consent are both batteries. In addition to the classical definitions of assault, some jurisdictions have used assault as a generic term to describe either assault or battery. Thus, a defendant who intentionally injures somebody may be convicted of assault rather than battery. Right, so we got a little more clarification on assault, and now we need to get to assign. We missed it. Oh, wait a second. Did we miss it? Oh, assault. All these sub-definitions really throw me off here. There we go, assign. To convey, to transfer rights or property. To assert, to point out. So we have things like the bank assigned the note to a thrift institution. To convey, to transfer rights or property. Assignment of error. And it's also to assert, to point out. So assignable is transferable, so that the transferee. And now let's look at transfer and see if it's actually a synonym. And I think depending on the jurisdiction, the context, it may have a variation here. Zoom out, maybe we'll go a little faster here like this. And assign may be in a certain context of a transfer. Oh, we got trespass, we went too far. Bear with me, please, as we go through this. Wow, transfer, here we go. Lots of transfers. We just want to get transfer from the 14th century. Any mode of disposing of or parting with an asset or an interest in an asset, including a gift, the payment of money, release, lease, or creation of a lien or other encumbrance. The term embraces every method, direct or indirect, absolute or conditional, voluntary or involuntary, of disposing of or parting with property or with an interest in property, including retention of title as a security interest and foreclosure of the debtor's equity of redemption. 2. Negotiation of an instrument according to the forms of law. The transfer is a negotiation of an instrument. The 4 methods of transfer are by endorsement, by delivery, by assignment, and by operational law. There we go. Now we see the difference. A transfer can be as an assignment. So one way of transferring of the 4 methods of transfer are by endorsement, delivery, assignment, and by operation of law. So conveyance of property or title from one person to another. That's transfer. All right. Well, that was worth a digression. Let's get back to the book here. All right, so the assignment is the formal transfer of the rights to something. An example would be a bank customer assigning the bank the right to receive benefits from a life insurance. Or would that be an endorsement? All right, to formally transfer something, assign. Assurance. Insurance cover for an event which will definitely happen, such as death. So assurance is for an insurance of something that will definitely happen, because it's assured to happen. Assure, to transfer the ownership of something. To assure. Assured is the person whose life is insured or who is entitled to receive the benefit from the assurance cover. Assured short-hold tenancy, a type of tenancy agreement under which the landlord has a right to take the property back at the end of the tenancy agreement. Attachment of earnings, a court order that deductions be made from a person's earnings. The employer pays the money collected to the court, and the court pays the money the people is owed. Attest, to sign a witness signature on a document. And attorney, a person appointed to act for another person, such as when someone cannot look after their own affairs. A formal document called power of attorney is used to appoint the attorney. It is also the name used for a United States lawyer. Interesting they say here, though, and something to take note. A person appointed to act for another person, and they give here a nice example, such as when someone cannot look after their own affairs. And a formal document called the power of attorney is used to appoint the attorney. Attorney General, the chief legal advisor to the government. He or she must be a member of parliament. Audit. Hey, let's pop over to the chat here and see if we have anyone of a namesake that's here in the chat. Gary says child support has their own meaning of words, which is true federal or state meaning. And true absent and injury, there cannot be a needy or dependent child. A lot of that stuff is statutory when you really come down to it. And being a member of that class A of the statutes applying to is where the trouble comes in. It only takes one party of that family to consent to that jurisdiction for there to be a cause for them to interlope. I digress. So let's get on here to audit, an independent examination of an organization's records and financial statements, report accounts, to make sure that, now this is just a financial audit, what they're saying here. The financial statements show a fair reflection of the financial position. The income and spending is shown accurately. The financial statements meet any legal conditions, and the financial statements are drawn up clearly. Notice nowhere in here is it saying it's looking for fraud. Auditor's report, a report and opinion by an independent person or firm on an organization's financial records. So these are one particular kind of audit and auditor's report. There's many kinds of audits, and financial is one of many. Authorized share capital, the highest amount of share capital that a company can issue. The amount is set out in the company's memorandum of association. Authorized investments, investments in which a trustee is permitted to invest trust money under an act of parliament. An autopsy, an examination of a dead body to find the cause of death. All right, well, with that, that leaves us with the A's. Let's jump over here to the chat. I know it was kind of a thin notification getting out there. We didn't get too many people here in the house, but perhaps next time we will, and we can carry on with this through the other letters. So we could go on to the B's for the next one, and just as a sneak peek ahead of what we got to see, bail, bailee, bail hostile. Now we did have Gary here. Let's just jump over here really quick as a real sneak peek into the D's and look under dependent. A dependent, a person, someone who depends on someone else for financial support. Again, this is British. All right, well, we got enough of that. Again, I know how helpful some of this stuff is for statutory stuff here, because this is very general. Again, those are our legal phrases in plain English. We'll continue with the B's next time if we have popular demand here, and if we want to continue with this. It is kind of tiresome, it seems, but there are some enlightening moments in here and ways of really clarifying the fine discernments between definitions so that we could be sure to be clear and precise in our language whenever we're dealing with any kind of legal phrases. Well, with that being said, I'd like to thank everyone that came out tonight to participate, and I hope to see you all on the next one. Peace out.